Let's take a look at solving one-step multiplication and division equations. And again, to solve an equation, we're going to use inverse operations so we can isolate that variable. So, let's take a look at the following. 2m equals negative 16. We need to focus on the side where the variable is. So we want to ask ourselves here, what's the operation going on near that variable? So what's happening here? We are multiplying it by 2. So the inverse then would be to divide by 2. So we can take the expression on the left, 2m, and divide it by 2. And we can take negative 16 and divide it by 2. Remember, in an equation, what you do to one side, you must do to the other. So, 2 divided by 2 is just a 1, and 1 times m is m. And look how we've isolated that variable all by itself. Negative 16 divided by 2 equals negative 8. So let's check. If we substitute negative 8 up here for the variable, 2 times negative 8, does it equal negative 16? Yes. Let's try another one. What if we have negative 36 equals negative 18 times n? Again, we're going to ask ourselves, what's the operation? What are we doing to the variable here? We're multiplying by negative 18. So the inverse would be to divide by negative 18. So if we take negative 36, divide by negative 18, negative 18n divided by negative 18. Now we're going to simplify. And negative 36 divided by negative 18 would be a positive 2. And we know that that equals 1, and 1 times n gives you n. So let's double check. If we substitute our 2 up here, negative 18 times 2 does equal negative 36. Let's try a different kind of problem. Let's say we have 12 equals 3/4 times n. Now notice the coefficient here is a fraction. In these other problems, our coefficient was an integer. All right, so we'd handle this a little bit differently. So, when your coefficient, all right, is a fraction, we have to look at things a little differently. We still ask ourselves, what are we doing to n? We are multiplying by 3/4 right here. Now the inverse, when we have a fraction, all right, we're still going to use multiplication, but we're going to use the multiplicative inverse, or what we call the reciprocal of this fraction, which would be 4/3. We're just flipping our numerator and our denominator. So now we're going to come and multiply both sides of the equation by 4/3. So I have 4/3 times 12 and 4/3 times 3/4 n. Since this is a fraction, it looks a little bit neater if we turn this whole number to a fraction by putting 1 in the denominator. And 4 times 12 is 48. 3 times 1 is 3. 48 divided by 3 simplifies to 16. So we're just simplifying as we go. All right. And 4/3, 4 times 3 is 12. 3 times 4 is 12. That's the same as 12 over 12, which equals 1. And 1 times n is n, and we get our n all by itself. All right. Now, let's check over here. If I substitute 16 in for n, I'm going to take this part of the equation and put 16 in here. I should get 12 if my answer is correct. So I'm going to put a 1 in the denominator. We know that 3 times 16 is 48. 4 times 1 is 4. 48 divided by 4 is 12. So great. We did do the problem correctly and got the right answer. All right, let's try another one. What if we have a negative fraction for a coefficient? Negative 2/3 equals 4. We just have to keep our integer, our negatives straight. So what's the operation? What are we doing to n? We're multiplying by negative 2/3. So since our coefficient is a fraction, our inverse operation is not division, it's still multiplication, but instead we'd be multiplying by negative 3/2. So let's go ahead and multiply both sides. We're going to put our negative 3/2. So here I did negative over our first term, and then negative 3/2 times, or 4 over here. So we know that these will multiply, where that's going to equal 1 when we multiply all that out. That's going to be negative times a negative, we know is going to be a 1. So that's how we isolate and got our variable by itself. And let's go ahead, this would be 3/2 times 4. So we know in fraction form, that's really just the same. We would turn our 4 to a 1, all right? And 3 times 4 is 12. 2 times 1 is 2, and this would be 6. So we have a negative times a positive. We know it's going to be negative. This would be negative 6. And we plug a 6 in here, and we simplify. We will end up getting a 4. All right, let's take a look at another type of problem. If we have n over negative 4 equals 3, again, we're looking at the side where the variable is. What are we doing to n here? We are dividing by a negative 4. So this is an integer, it's not a fraction. So the easiest thing to do here, the inverse now would be to multiply by negative 4 on both sides. So I'm going to do negative 4. All right, and I'm going to multiply it by my term on the left. And I'm going to do negative 4 times 3 on the right. So my negative 4's will cancel, all right, because negative 4 divided by negative 4 is a 1, and 1 times n is n. Negative 4 times 3 is negative 12. So let's go back and substitute. If I put a negative 12 here for n, negative 12 divided by negative 4 does equal 3. All right, let's look at another problem. I have negative 18 equals n over negative 3. What am I doing here to the n? I'm dividing by negative 3. So the inverse would be multiplying by negative 3. So I'm going to multiply both sides by negative 3. Alright, and remember we use parentheses now for multiplication. We don't use x's or dots. So a negative 3 times a negative 18 gives us a positive 54. And our 3's will cancel, and we have n. So let's double check. If we put 54 up here in place of n, 54 divided by negative 3 does equal negative 8. Okay, oh, sorry about that, couldn't see that. So negative 3 times negative 18 was a positive 54. And our negative 3's are going to cancel, and that will equal n. N will equal 54. Okay, so in summary, you kind of have 3 basic types of problems. So you might have something like negative 3n equals 12. We might have something like n over 5 equals negative 4. And we might have something where our coefficient is a fraction. So just a quick review. Here we're multiplying by negative 3, all right? The coefficient is just an integer. So here we're multiplying by negative 3. So the inverse operation would be to divide by negative 3. In this problem here, we're dividing by 5, so the inverse would be to multiply by 5. And in our third model here, since the coefficient is a fraction, here we're multiplying by 2/3. And because this is a fraction, the inverse operation is still multiplication, all right? But we would be multiplying by its multiplicative inverse, or what we call the reciprocal, okay? So this is your multiplicative inverse. Also known as its reciprocal. Okay? Well, thanks for checking in. Hope this helped.